It's pretty amazing when you think about it. What if the entire story of a country, its ancient past, its industrial boom, all its political drama, and even its modern identity, could all be found inside the walls of just one building? It sounds kind of crazy, right? But in the tiny Pyrenean nation of Andorra, the history of one single house and the family who lived there tells the story of everything. So, that's the big question we're tackling today. We're going to trace the incredible rise and the dramatic fall of the Areny-Plandolit family. And as we do, you'll see it's like a perfect mirror, a microcosm of Andorra itself. Their story of wealth, power, and crisis is the nation's story. And this is it, the Casa d'Areny-Plandolit. Seriously, this place is so much more than a house. It's a living time capsule. These walls have seen moments of unbelievable wealth and moments of just crushing failure. By unlocking its secrets, we're going to unlock the history of Andorra. Okay, so here's our roadmap. We'll start by setting the scene in the Pyrenees. Then we'll watch the incredible rise of this powerful dynasty and the empire they built on livestock and iron. But of course, every empire faces trouble, and we'll see the turmoil that tore their world apart. At the heart of it all is one man's high-stakes gamble, which leads to this amazing final twist, as a private home becomes a national treasure. First things first, let's get our bearings. Andorra is this tiny, really rugged country tucked away high in the Pyrenees Mountains. It's literally sandwiched between two giants, France and Spain. And for centuries, being so isolated really shaped its unique culture, its economy, and its fiercely independent spirit. All right, so our story kicks off in the 17th century with a family called the Arenes. Now, these guys were not born into nobility. Their story is all about ambition and making really smart moves. It was a slow, calculated climb up the social and economic ladder of Andorran society. And you can actually see this climb, this upward mobility, in a really cool detail: the jobs they listed when they signed legal documents. In the early 1600s, they were just farmers. A few decades later, they're traders. Then they become notaries. But the title that really sealed the deal was a livestock farmer of ordino. That meant they controlled one of the most powerful economic engines of the era. But how did they lock in that power? Well, it wasn't just about business, it was about bloodlines. Strategic marriages were the name of the game. The absolute key move happened in 1821 when an Oreny heiress named Maria Rosa married Joseph Plandolit. And get this, the marriage contract was so favorable to the Orenys that it said their kid's last name would be Areny-Plandolit, not the other way around. Just like that, two massive estates merged into one. A true dynasty was born. So now, with their power locked down, the Areny-Plandolits entered their golden age. They completely dominated the two industries that were the lifeblood of Andorra, livestock and iron. And they didn't just participate, they built an absolute empire. The foundation of their wealth was this thing called transhumans. And don't picture some quaint, simple sheep herding. No. Think of it more like a massive, complex, logistical operation. They ran companies that moved thousands of sheep in these huge, carefully managed flocks from the high Pyrenees down to winter pastures in Spain. They were renting land, paying shepherds, and timing animal sales at fairs perfectly to make enormous profits. And this brings us to their next genius move. The family pivoted. As powerful as livestock was, they saw the future was in industry. So in the 18th century, ironworking took over as their main business. And this wasn't just them changing their portfolio. This was the spark of an industrial revolution for the whole country, and they were leading the charge. So what was their secret weapon? Technology. They perfected the Catalan forge, which was a revolutionary system that used a water-powered air pump instead of old-school bellows. It was way more powerful, way more efficient, and it let them build bigger furnaces. Their forges were the most advanced in the entire country, just churning out iron for the Catalan market, right up until 1876. So just how rich are we talking? Well, by 1716, their side hustle of moneylending alone was worth over 34,000 liras. To give you some perspective, selling 2,000 sheep, a huge deal, was worth about 2,600 liras. This was an almost unimaginable amount of money. They weren't just business owners, they were basically the central bank for the entire region. With that kind of fortune, you'd think the Areny-Plandolits were untouchable, sitting right at the very top of Andorran society. But, as we all know, golden ages don't last forever. The 19th century brought chaos right to Andorra's doorstep. Civil wars were raging in Spain between conservatives and liberals, and for neutral Andorra, this was a political tightrope walk, with waves of refugees flooding the valleys and threatening to drag the country right into the fight. And while all this was happening on the outside, Andorra was facing a crisis from within. Its political system was just deeply, deeply unfair, a leftover from feudal times that was designed to keep power in the hands of a few. Society was basically split in two. You had the Unfuch, who were the heads of the old, powerful landowning families, like the Areny-Plandolit, and they held all the political power. And then there was everybody else, the Koslers, who had no vote and zero voice in how the country was run. And this chart, wow, it really shows you just how unsustainable the whole thing had become. I mean, look at the numbers for their home parish, Ordino. In the early 1600s, the groups were about the same size. But by 1863, the ruling class, the Anfokosh, had shrunk to just 19 families, while the group with no rights, the Kazalers, had ballooned to 120. The government now represented only 13% of households. This wasn't just inequality, it was a ticking time bomb. And right into the middle of this powder keg steps our main character, Guillem d'Areny-Plandolit. Born in 1822, he was the head of the dynasty, a man of incredible wealth, tradition, and conservative values. And yet, in a huge twist, he would become the leader of a movement for radical, revolutionary change. And this right here, this was the core demand of the new reform movement that Guillem championed. It was simple, direct, and totally revolutionary. Give every head of household the right to vote, a proposal that threatened to smash the very system his own family had controlled for centuries. So you gotta ask, why? Why would a guy at the absolute top of the pyramid want to tear it all down? Well, it's complicated. Was he a true believer in democracy? Maybe, but there was also a really practical, almost desperate reason. The traditional markets for their iron and livestock were collapsing. The Areny-Plandolit fortune was in serious trouble. Guillem realized that modernizing Andorra's economy was the only way to save his own family, and political reform had to come first. And this timeline just shows how incredibly fast his whole plan went from brilliant to, well, a total disaster. After pushing the reform through, Guillem becomes syndic, the head of state. His big idea? Drag Andorra into the modern age by building a huge casino and spa to attract rich tourists. But the project was a catastrophe. It ran out of money, the investors bailed, and the whole thing imploded, sparking a massive political crisis. The crisis of 1868 pushed Andorra right to the brink of civil war. To force his project through a hostile council, Guillem actually brought in armed men to intimidate his opponents. He made the fight personal, he fired officials, he created total chaos. It was a gamble that went way too far. The co-princes had to step in. Guillem was fired, put on trial, and eventually forced into exile. The Areny-Plandolit dynasty's political power was shattered forever. The fall was just as quick and dramatic as the rise. Guillem's huge gamble had failed, and with his disgrace, the family's story moves into its final chapter. But as the family faded away, the house they built was about to be reborn. Guillem died in exile in 1876, leaving behind a ruined estate. The house fell into disrepair, just a silent monument to a lost fortune. And for almost 100 years, it just sat there. Until 1972, when Andorra's General Council stepped in. They bought the property, not to tear it down, but to preserve it as the Casa d'Areny-Plandolit Museum, a treasure for the entire nation. And in that moment, the transformation was complete. What was once a symbol of private power and wealth became a source of public heritage for everyone. Even the other buildings were repurposed. A building that was supposed to be a private museum of natural sciences was eventually turned into the National Auditorium of Andorra. The family's private world was opened up for all to see. You know, the story of the Areny-Plandolit house really shows us that buildings are never just buildings. They're like archives of our shared past, holding these incredible stories of ambition, of conflict, and of change. It kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? What histories, what forgotten stories of success and failure are hiding in the walls of the buildings in your own town?